She was abandoned at 7, forgotten by family, lost in the foster system for 14 years. But on her 21st birthday, Rosalie Quinn received a letter that would change everything, an unexpected inheritance from a grandmother she barely remembered, and a key to a hidden fortune worth over $15 million. What she found on that farm, it wasn't just land. It was a legacy, and someone was willing to lie, threaten, and steal to take it from her. Before we begin, if you believe that even a broken past can lead to something beautiful, subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Rosalie Quinn had grown up believing she was nobody's girl, passed from one foster home to the next for 14 long years. She'd learned not to unpack her bag or her heart. On the morning she turned 21, the state of Arizona set her loose. No plan, no safety net, just 2 plastic bags of second-hand clothes and $43 in her pocket. Freedom never felt so terrifying. Her parents had died in a fire when she was just 7. Her only living relative, Elaine Quinn, had vanished from her life soon after. Rosalie assumed she'd been forgotten, just another child swallowed by the system. But on the day she was released, a letter arrived. Hand-delivered from a law office in Maine. Inside, a brass skeleton key, a short, handwritten note, and a formal letter. Your grandmother, Elaine Quinn, has passed. You are her sole heir. She has left you a 120-acre farm in Windermere, Maine, along with a sealed box labeled "To be opened when the time is right." Rosalie had nothing. No home, no family, no future. But what waited for her on that forgotten farm, and it was about to rewrite everything she thought she knew. The bus ride from Phoenix to Windermere, Maine, took almost 3 days. 3 days of stale air, vending machine food, and the kind of silence only strangers know how to keep. Rosalie Quinn sat near the back, staring through fogged windows as desert sand turned to forest, and time seemed to fold in on itself. She clutched the envelope from Whitmore and Company. In her lap, the thick, cream-colored one with the brass key inside. Every few hours, she opened it, reread the attorney's letter, and traced her fingers over her grandmother's shaky handwriting on the note. There is more than you know. The truth waits for you here. Elaine. Elaine Quinn. The name felt foreign and intimate all at once. Rosalie hadn't heard it spoken in over a decade. Her last memory of the woman was a vague scent of lavender and wood shavings, and a voice that once called her little bird. After her parents died, Elaine had refused custody. Too old, too isolated, not fit to raise a grieving child. The system had said, and that was that. Until now? When the Greyhound pulled into Windermere's tiny station, Rosalie stepped off into a world that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Cobblestone sidewalks, a general store with peeling paint, a church bell that chimed noon like it was still 1950. A man in his 60s waited beside a forest green pickup truck, holding a sign that read, R. Quinn. He wore a thick wool coat and a guarded expression that softened the moment he saw her. You must be Rosalie, he said, extending his hand. I'm Walter Bishop, your grandmother's property manager. Drove her to town, fixed what needed fixing, watched over things these last few months. His handshake was firm, but kind. She told me you'd come. Rosalie blinked. She did. He gave a small, knowing smile. Elaine Quinn was many things. Stubborn, secretive, but wrong about people. Never. They rode in silence for a while. The road curved between snow-dusted pine trees and rolling hills. As they crested a ridge, Walter nodded toward the valley below. There it is, the Quinn farm. It stretched wide and wild beneath the gray sky fields, sleeping beneath frost. A wraparound porch sagging with time. a red barn standing tall beside a line of bare apple trees. It was beautiful in a way Rosalie couldn't explain. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Walter handed her the keys as they stood outside the farmhouse. She asked that no one step foot inside after she passed. Said it was for your eyes only. Rosalie stepped into the house alone. The air smelled like cedar and old books. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, illuminating a world frozen in time hand-woven rugs, shelves of woodworking tools, and photographs, dozens of them, lining the mantel. And there, on the center of the dining table, was a wooden box. It was carved from dark walnut, smooth to the touch, and engraved with her name Rosalie Quinn. Beneath it, in delicate script, "Open when you're ready." Her fingers hovered over the lid, but she didn't open it. Not yet. That night, she explored the rest of the house. Every room was filled with her grandmother's life hand-carved furniture, leather-bound journals, woodworking blueprints. The barn was locked tight, but Walter had given her the key. Inside, she expected rusted tools and hay bales. She found something else entirely. The barn had been transformed into a professional-grade woodworking studio, clean, precise, and extraordinary. Expensive saws, workbenches, lathes, rows of labeled exotic woods, rosewood, koa, bird's-eye maple. Shelves displayed furniture so exquisite it could have belonged in a museum, sculpted armoires, intricately carved bed frames, handcrafted chairs that seemed more art than utility. In one corner stood a covered crate, written in chalk "Private," to be moved by attorney instruction only. Rosalie pulled back the tarp. Inside was a stack of large paintings, each wrapped and tagged. One name kept appearing on the labels. Julien Vaillard, Private Collection. Appraised $2.7 million. Do not disturb. Her breath caught in her throat. Julien Vaillard. That name. Even she knew it. One of the most famous fine art collectors in the world. She flipped through the ledger resting beside the crate and nearly dropped it. Her grandmother had crafted custom display pieces and wooden casings for high-value artworks and collector museums across Europe. There were signed contracts, appraisals, photographs, and at the bottom of the stack a letter addressed to Rosalie in her grandmother's bold, looping script. If you're reading this, little bird, then you've stepped into the life I always meant for you. I wasn't strong enough to raise you, but I could leave you something no one could take a legacy. This isn't just a farm. It's the archive of my life's work, and now it's yours. But be warned, there are people who know its value, and they may try to steal it from you. Don't trust everyone, but trust yourself. The box in the house, it holds the truth. Rosalie stood alone in the barn, heart pounding, hands trembling. Everything she thought she knew about her life had just changed. She hadn't just inherited land. She'd inherited a secret collection of handcrafted masterpieces linked to world-class art, and a hidden fortune that someone might kill for. And the key to it all waited quietly inside that box. 3 days after arriving at the Quinn farm, Rosalie Quinn was still reeling from what she had discovered in the barn. The place wasn't just an old workshop. It was a museum of hidden brilliance. Crates of high-end display cases her grandmother had handcrafted for galleries across Europe. Signed letters from private collectors. Custom contracts with names Rosalie had only heard whispered in documentaries. Julien Vaillard, Cécile Duret, the Rothschild Gallery in Paris. Appraisal tags fluttered like ghosts on the edges of furniture wrapped in linen and plastic. One chair, simple, yet masterfully jointed, was labeled at $280,000. Another, part of a set built for a Manhattan penthouse, was appraised at $1.1 million. She added the values together, piece by piece, page by page. It wasn't just art. It was a legacy valued at over $15 million. And it was all sitting here, in a quiet barn, in Windermere, Maine. A fortune hidden in plain sight. But that kind of money doesn't stay quiet for long. It was just past noon when she heard the sound of tires crunching up the driveway. She looked out the window and instantly knew something was wrong. The SUV that pulled up wasn't from around here, sleek, black, spotless despite the muddy roads, its windows tinted too dark, its presence too deliberate. A man stepped out. He wore a gray wool coat, Italian leather shoes, and a silk scarf knotted too perfectly. His smile was polite. His eyes were not. He approached the front porch slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Miss Quinn," he called, his voice smooth. "My name is Alexander Grayson. I believe we have something to discuss." Rosalie stepped outside, but didn't invite him in. "I don't think we do," she said. "Oh, I think we do," Grayson replied calmly, pulling a leather folder from beneath his coat. "I represent a private collector who has, shall we say, an interest in the Quinn estate." Rosalie didn't answer. She just stared at him, cold wind whipping her hair across her face. He continued. "Your grandmother and my client had a long-standing relationship. There was an outstanding agreement. Unfinished work, delayed delivery." He tapped the folder. "Technically, items stored here fall under a contractual clause. If you've looked through the crates, I'm sure you understand what I mean." Rosalie narrowed her eyes. "I know exactly what's in those crates, and none of it has your client's name on it." Grayson smiled, like a teacher amused by a naive student. "You're young? Alone? I understand. Legal language can be complicated." He opened the folder and slid it toward her. "Here's my client's offer, $220,000 for the entire estate property. Barn, all inventory, cash. Fast, clean." Rosalie stared at the number, then looked back at him. "You know what's in that barn is worth more than $15 million. His smile faltered just slightly, and that was all the confirmation she needed. "He knew! I'm not selling," she said firmly. Grayson's tone cooled. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a courtesy. You have 10 days to accept. After that, we will pursue full legal action to recover property we believe was obtained improperly, possibly even fraudulently." "You're threatening to sue me?" she asked. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I'm suggesting you walk away while you still can. You don't have the legal team, the knowledge, or the experience to fight this. This legacy, it's too much for someone like you." That was the moment Rosalie's spine straightened. She'd been told all her life that she was too much, or not enough. Too quiet, not stable, too broken, not family. But she had built her entire life surviving people who underestimated her. "You have 10 seconds to leave my property," she said. Grayson's jaw tightened. "Think carefully. Miss Quinn, there's a lot at stake here. Don't let pride destroy what little you've been given." Her glare didn't waver. "I wasn't given anything. She left this for me. And you're not taking it." He turned without another word, walked to the SUV, and drove off, the wheels spinning slightly in the mud as he pulled away. That night, Rosalie sat in the kitchen, heart still pounding. On the table sat the sealed walnut box she had avoided opening since the day she arrived. "Open when you're ready," the lid read. She was ready now. She turned the brass key slowly. The latch clicked. Inside were 3 items. A leather-bound journal labeled Confidential Grayson and Associates. A notarized letter from her grandmother's attorney. A flash drive marked "Watch this first." She opened the journal. It was devastating. Page after page detailed meetings, threats, and offers from Grayson over the last decade. Elaine had documented everything: his pressuring tactics, attempted blackmail, and even shady property offers to elderly artisans in neighboring towns. She had refused everyone, But she knew he'd come back. The attorney's letter legally transferred every piece of art, woodwork, and intellectual property to Rosalie Quinn, without exception. Rosalie plugged the flash drive into her laptop. A video loaded. Her grandmother appeared on screen, seated in the same kitchen, her voice worn but fierce. If Grayson shows up, don't listen to a word he says. He tried to steal this once. He'll try again. But everything here belongs to you. And somewhere in this barn is the proof that will end this fight for good. Trust your hands. Trust your instincts. And above all, trust your name. Rosalie wiped tears from her eyes. She wasn't just the heir to a hidden fortune. She was the last line of defense for a legacy someone had built with blood, wood, and love. And for the first time in her life, she was ready to fight for what was hers. For most of her life, Rosalie Quinn had never truly belonged anywhere. She was the quiet one, the foster girl. The name no one remembered once the placement ended. She had grown up believing that survival was the only goal worth chasing. But now, standing in the center of her grandmother's barn-turned-masterwork studio, that belief began to crack. Because survival was no longer the only thing she had. Now, she had something to protect. In the days after Alexander Grayson's visit, something shifted inside her. The fear was still there, coiled in her chest, whispering doubt, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, a steady flame of determination began to burn. She got up early each morning and worked late into the night, digging through every crate, every document, every hidden drawer in the barn. She wasn't just looking for comfort anymore, she was looking for answers. And in the process, she began to see her grandmother not as the woman who had once rejected her, but as the woman who had spent her final years preparing a fortress in wood. Ink and love. Elaine Quinn hadn't just left Rosalie a property. She had left her a carefully constructed battle plan. The flash drive contained more than just warnings. It also held tutorials videos her grandmother had recorded over the course of a decade. In them, Elaine's hands moved with precision, her voice calm and steady, explaining techniques that took a lifetime to master. She taught Rosalie how to read the grain of black walnut, how to match dovetail joints by feel, not sight, how to sign each piece in a way only family would recognize a barely visible curve beneath the first letter of her name. Rosalie set up a small workbench near the back of the barn and began practicing. Her hands were clumsy. At first, she nicked the wood, over sanded edges, split one board by accident, but she didn't stop. Day by day, her movements grew steadier. She watched each video twice, sometimes 3 times. She mimicked the angles, the rhythm, the patience. She wasn't just protecting a legacy anymore. She was becoming a part of it. One morning, Walter stopped by with a bag of groceries and a surprised look. "You built that?" he asked, nodding toward a simple pine bench near the entrance. "Looks solid." Rosalie wiped sweat from her brow and smiled shyly. "It wobbles a little. I'm still learning." He ran a hand along the edge, inspecting the joints. "You're further along than you think." She looked down at the bench. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It existed because she'd made it, because she'd woken up, ignored the fear, and chosen to try again. Walter paused. "Your grandmother. She used to say the craft saves you twice. First when you're lost, then when you're ready to build." Rosalie began organizing everything. She cataloged each piece of furniture stored in the barn, attaching photos, appraisal reports, provenance documents. She created spreadsheets of contracts, highlighting unpaid commissions, completed works, and outstanding disputes. In one hidden drawer of Elaine's desk, she found photographs of her mother taken right on this farm. A young woman with wild, dark hair and the same half-smile Rosalie had seen in her own mirror. In one photo, Her mother stood in the orchard, holding a baby Rosalie in her arms. Tears welled in her eyes. All her life, she thought she was forgotten. But now, she was discovering she had been loved quietly, fiercely, and with great intention. Her perspective shifted again. This wasn't just about stopping Grayson. This was about restoring a broken lineage, about reclaiming something that had nearly been lost. 10 days passed. Grayson didn't return. But Rosalie didn't wait. She drove into town and met with Margot Ellis, a local attorney who had once worked with Elaine. With Walter's help, she presented everything: the notarized documents, the video testimony, the journal entries, the signed contracts. Margot took one look at the folder and whistled. "I've been practicing law for 22 years, she said, flipping through the pages, "and I've never seen someone so thoroughly prepared for war from beyond the grave." Rosalie smiled for the first time in weeks. "I think she knew exactly who she was up against," she said. And now Margot asked. Rosalie took a breath. "Now I fight back." That evening, she returned home to a surprise. A small package sat on her front porch. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy image of the barn's interior, clearly taken from outside through the window. Taped to the back was a note in blocky handwriting. "This doesn't belong to you." Her fingers curled around the edge of the note. Her heart didn't race. Her knees didn't shake. Instead, she walked calmly to the barn, locked every door, and then returned to her workbench. She sanded in silence, breathing in sawdust and defiance. Whoever had sent that message had no idea who Rosalie Quinn was becoming. She was no longer the quiet girl no one noticed. She was no longer the abandoned foster kid. She was a builder, a keeper of legacy. And one way or another, she was going to finish what her grandmother had started. By the second week of December, the frost had hardened across the Quinn farm. The trees stood bare, the orchard frozen silent, and smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney where Rosalie Quinn now lived not just as an heir, but as a guardian. She was no longer just defending her grandmother's legacy. She was beginning to envision what could come next. It started with a letter. A plain envelope slid into the mailbox, tucked between heating bills and a seed catalog. Inside was a handwritten note from a local artisan named Mara Delaney, who ran a small pottery studio just outside of town. "Elaine once mentored me when I was getting started. She believed deeply in preserving handmade craft. If you ever open the barn to others or need help navigating the business side, please reach out. Her work changed my life. I think she meant for it to change yours too." Rosalie read the note 3 times. She'd been so focused on fighting Grayson, so consumed with protecting what was already here, that she hadn't let herself ask the next question. What now? That weekend, she visited Mara's studio. It was warm and alive with motion clay wheels spinning, glazes drying, wood stoves humming. Young artists moved through the space with energy and purpose. On one shelf sat a small wooden box, delicately carved with a leaf pattern Rosalie instantly recognized. "Her grandmother's work? I keep it there," Mara said softly. Noticing Rosalie staring. "Elaine made it for me when I opened this place. Told me that every creator needs one object in their space that reminds them why they started." Rosalie looked around the studio, and for the first time, she saw something she hadn't dared imagine in years belonging. That night, she stood in the center of the barn and turned on every light. The space glowed. Polished floors, organized tools, crates and benches lined up like silent students waiting to be taught. She ran her hands along the workbench her grandmother had used for nearly 40 years. The whisper rose in her chest. What if this place could become something more? She started with a sign. Nothing grand. Just a hand-carved plank hung near the front gate. "Quinn Woodworks, custom commissions, and heritage design. She opened a basic website using free tools from the library, uploaded photos of her grandmother's furniture, created a blog page with entries like, "What I learned from my first uneven table," "Legacy in every joint," "How a farm saved a girl who had nothing." She didn't expect anyone to read them, but someone did. Within 2 weeks, her inbox began to fill. An email from a collector in Massachusetts. "I recognized that armoire. I saw it in an Elaine Quinn gallery years ago. You're her granddaughter. Is there anything left to purchase?" A message from a school teacher in Bangor. "My students are learning about American artisans. Would you ever consider a workshop or field trip?" A DM on social media from a woman in Vermont. "My foster daughter is obsessed with woodworking. I told her your story. She cried. She didn't know people like her could inherit something beautiful." Rosalie sat at the kitchen table, stunned. The world was watching, quietly, respectfully. And more importantly, the right people were finding her. She reached out to Mara, then to 2 other local craftspeople her grandmother had once supported. They brainstormed over coffee in the barn, mapping ideas on scrap paper. Weekend classes in handcrafting, a seasonal market featuring local makers, an apprenticeship program for at-risk youth, a community space for those with no other place to go. Rosalie's hands trembled as she wrote the last one, because she had been one of them. And now, she could be someone who opened the door for the next. Walter was the first to volunteer his time. He showed up with a toolbox and a notebook full of blueprints. "Your grandmother always wanted to convert the old grain shed into a guest studio," he said. "She just never got around to it. What do you say we finish it for her?" They began work the next morning shoveling snow, clearing debris, rewiring the old structure. Rosalie worked alongside him, muscles sore, fingers blistered, but spirit soaring. She wasn't just building a program, she was rebuilding the heart of the land. One evening, she stood in the barn alone after everyone had gone home. The soft hum of silence surrounded her. The scent of cedar and sawdust lingered in the air like a memory. On her workbench sat her first fully custom piece, a rocking chair designed from one of her grandmother's earliest sketches. She had carved her initials beneath the seat, using the same hidden mark her grandmother once taught her. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And it was only the beginning. She picked up her journal, opened to a blank page, and wrote, "Today, someone asked what this place is now. I told them it used to be a legacy, but now, it's a beginning." By January, the snow on the Quinn farm had grown thick and undisturbed, blanketing the fields in silence. The workshop in the barn, however, was far from quiet. Tools buzzed, laughter echoed, and the scent of warm pine filled the air. Rosalie Quinn had become someone no one, not even she would have recognized a few months earlier. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't waiting for permission to matter. She was showing up every single day to a life she was building with her own 2 hands. The apprenticeship program had taken off faster than she expected. Through Mara Delaney's network, Rosalie had connected with 3 young women, 2 from nearby group homes, one newly aged out of the foster system like Rosalie once had. None of them had ever held a chisel, much less built anything before. But each carried that same haunted expression Rosalie had worn like armor for years. She didn't approach them like a teacher. She approached them like someone who understood the ache of being discarded. She handed them tools, not lectures, space, not pressure. And slowly, they responded. One of them, Kaylee, age 19, crafted a jewelry box with hidden compartments. Another, Naomi, soft-spoken but curious, built a stool so sturdy Walter joked it could survive a hurricane. They didn't just learn to shape wood. They were learning to believe they could shape something at all. But growth rarely comes without challenge. One cold evening, after a long day in the shop, Rosalie returned to the farmhouse to find her mailbox open. Inside was another envelope. No return address. This time, the note was printed. Cold, clean, corporate. Notice of pending litigation, Quinn Estate versus Grayson Holdings. Her breath caught. She read it again. Grayson had followed through. Despite the evidence, despite the notarized ownership, despite everything, he was suing her. The next morning, Rosalie drove to Bangor and walked straight into Margot Ellis's law office, letter in hand. Margot skimmed it and nodded calmly. I figured this was coming. Can we stop it? Rosalie asked, heart pounding. Yes, Margot said, but it won't be easy. For the next 4 weeks, Rosalie entered a new kind of fight, not with saws and sandpaper, but with affidavits, case law, and court deadlines. She met with appraisers, filed motions, and stood before legal boards to defend the authenticity of every crate and contract in the barn. She presented videos, journals, provenance documents, all while managing the growing weight of being a leader, a mentor, a business owner. There were moments she wanted to crumble, moments she stared at her grandmother's workbench, asking silently, "Am I really the person you thought I could be?" But every time she considered quitting, someone showed up. Kaylee brought her tea. Naomi left a note on her bench. "We believe in you. That's what you've taught us to do." Even Walter, who rarely said much, simply tightened his gloves one morning and muttered, "You're doing good, kid. Damn proud of you." Then came the court day. Rosalie wore a gray blazer borrowed from Mara and boots she'd sanded herself. She stood tall beside Margot, across from a sleek team of Grayson's lawyers, all polished smiles and sharp suits. She spoke clearly, confidently, walking the panel through the history of Elaine Quinn's work, the records she'd maintained, and the signed transfer of ownership to Rosalie. When one attorney tried to imply she didn't understand the value of what she had inherited, Rosalie responded without blinking. "My grandmother didn't build this legacy so someone else could dismantle it with loopholes and arrogance. She built it for me, and I've honored every inch of it with my own 2 hands." There was a long silence after that. Then the judge leaned forward, cleared his throat, and delivered the ruling. All claims from Grayson Holdings dismissed. Ownership of the Quinn estate fully and legally confirmed to Rosalie Quinn. Back at the farm that night, the barn was lit up like a lantern in the dark. The apprentices had decorated the space with garlands made from shavings and twine, and someone had baked a crooked apple pie. Walter raised a glass of cider. "To Rosalie," he said gruffly, "and to fighting the good fight." Laughter, applause, even a few tears. Rosalie looked around the room and realized something that made her knees go weak for just a second. This was home, not because she owned the land, but because she had poured herself into every board, every brick, every soul that passed through the door. She had claimed it, not just with inheritance, but with effort, grit, and care. She had become more than the girl who was left behind. She had become the woman who stayed and built. Later that night, alone in the barn, Rosalie stood in front of her grandmother's original workbench. She whispered, "We did it." And for the first time, the silence didn't echo back emptiness. It echoed peace. Spring arrived slowly in Windermere, Maine. The snow melted from the apple orchard in soft sheets, revealing buds of green beneath the earth, like promises that had waited all winter to be kept. Rosalie Quinn stood on the front porch of the farmhouse one April morning, coffee in hand, sunlight warming her face. The air smelled like damp wood and fresh beginnings. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for something bad to happen. She was simply living. The lawsuit was behind her. Grayson's empire of intimidation had crumbled the moment real truth stood in front of it. News of the case had made its way through artisan circles across New England, and messages poured in letters of support, stories from others who had been targeted by collectors and middlemen who profited off creators' silence. Rosalie didn't stay silent anymore. She told her story. In interviews, blog posts, and community meetings, she talked about her grandmother's legacy, the power of handmade craft, and how the foster system had nearly stolen her sense of worth until an old key and a locked box gave it back. But what moved people most wasn't just the story of the $15 million collection. It was how she chose to use it. Instead of selling the collection piece by piece, Rosalie created something called the Quinn Trust, a non-profit initiative with one mission: to preserve artisan legacy and pass on skills to those who never thought they were worthy of inheriting anything. The barn became more than a workshop. It became a school, a refuge, a second chance factory. Over the next year, dozens of young adults came through the doors, many of them from foster care, group homes, or generational poverty. Some stayed for a week, some stayed forever. They learned how to use tools, how to restore damaged wood, how to work with their hands after a lifetime of being told they were difficult or unfixable. And slowly, they began to rebuild themselves, too. On the one-year anniversary of her arrival, Rosalie hosted the first Quinn Makers Market, a gathering of artisans from across the state, each of them showcasing work inspired or directly influenced by Elaine Quinn's techniques. Locals came in droves, buyers from out of state, a reporter from Yankee magazine, even a rep from the American Folk Art Museum. But Rosalie didn't care about attention. She cared about what it felt like when the apprentices stood beside their finished pieces with nervous pride, explaining the grain of a tabletop or the design of a hand-carved headboard. She cared when she saw Kaylee's eyes fill with tears as someone bought her first commissioned piece. Or when Naomi was asked to speak about her design process and whispered afterward, "No one's ever asked me about my process before." Rosalie just smiled, because this not the money, not the fame was the true inheritance. That night, long after the crowd had cleared and the barn stood quiet again, Rosalie sat in the orchard with Walter and Mara, both nursing cups of cider and watching the fireflies blink over the field. "You know," Walter said, looking out at the trees, "Elaine would have loved this." Rosalie nodded. She planned it all, every page, every box, every step. She just didn't know what I'd do with it. Mara smiled. "I think she knew exactly what you'd do. She just wanted you to choose it for yourself." They fell into a comfortable silence. Then, from the farmhouse, the porch light flickered once a signal. Naomi and Kaylee were inside, probably burning a pie or fighting over music again. Rosalie rose, brushed her hands on her jeans, and turned back toward the home that had once belonged to someone else, but now felt entirely like her own. Before going inside, she paused by the workshop one last time. On the outer wall, a plaque now hung freshly carved from walnut, the same wood Elaine used in her earliest pieces. The inscription read, "She built with her hands and taught with her heart. In honor of Elaine Quinn, 1940 to 2023. Rosalie ran her fingers over the letters, then added, softly, "And I'll keep building, too." That night, as stars spread across the Maine sky, Rosalie sat by the window in her room with her journal open, the same way she had on her very first night here. But this time, her entry wasn't a question. It was a declaration. "I thought I was abandoned, but I was being prepared. I thought I was unwanted, but I was being protected. I thought I had nothing, but I had roots waiting to be found. I am not just surviving, I am creating, and no one can take that from me again." And with that, she closed the journal, turned off the light, and let peace carry her into sleep, knowing that tomorrow the work would begin again. But this time, it was her work, her story, her legacy. Sometimes, the things we believe are losses are really preparation. Rosalie Quinn thought she had been abandoned by her family, by the system, by life itself. But in truth, she was being shaped. Every heartbreak, every foster home, every unanswered question carved resilience into her bones. When she inherited her grandmother's farm, it wasn't just land. It was a blueprint for healing, hidden in wood grain and handwritten notes. The most powerful lesson Rosalie learned was that you don't have to be born into legacy to carry one forward. You can be the start of it. With her bare hands and broken history, she chose to build, to transform pain into purpose, to become the kind of person she once needed. If Rosalie's story moved you, hit subscribe. And if you know someone who needs a fresh start, share this with them. Sometimes, what feels like the end is just the beginning.